always so good. I got it.
Really?
Well, I look like me, and I know you.
All we need.
Madam Clerk.
I just put it down and she like, and you see me pulling it back up, but she can't. That's stalking. That's harassment and stalking. So I have my attorney look, I have my attorney, hey, I have my attorney looking at it, because it's stalking.
Yes. I'm able to.
No.
Orange light.
Yeah. Can you see? Hey, great. Good to see you. Really? Really is.
I'm sorry. I do not.
I heard that. He comes over. He usually.
We need to hurry up, because I got one of the last things. Damn, for bad service.
Hey. Well, he wanted an offer. No, he won't.
Nah.
Yeah.
Roll call. Got most everybody here.
Good evening.
It
Evening.
I'd like to call the Nash County Board of Education special call meeting to order, please. Roll call. Madam Clerk, could you do the roll call for me, please?
Blank Dunton.
Good evening, Ms. Lamb.
Hi. Mrs. Sharp.
Here.
Ms. Washington.
Present.
Ms. Bullitt, Evelyn Bullitt. Here. Chris Bissett.
Yes.
Franklin Lamb.
Here.
Sharonda Thomas Bullock. Rick Jenkins.
Here.
Donovan Chavis.
Here.
Reginald Silver.
Here.
Dean Edwards.
So, Madam Board Clerk, we do have enough for a quorum. We got 100% participation today.
Yes,
Great. First of all, let me say welcome and thank you guys for coming out in such a short notice. This, what we will be talking to is near and dear to a lot of people's hearts, as well as what we've been pushing and looking at for such a long time. And I know it's a lot of issues been going around talking regarding this particular venue. And I am so glad that somehow we can sort of sit around and talk about what we need to do as Nash County for our children. Always remember the first thing is Edge would always tell us, first thing is our children and those children. It's not about what we think or what we believe what's best to educate our kids. So with that not said, I got an agenda. I need adoption for the agenda for tonight. A motion, I'm sorry.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Silver, seconded by Mrs. Chavis. Questions or discussions? Madam Clerk, can you do a roll call vote, please?
Blake Dunton,
Yes.
Bill Starr,
Yes.
Latunda Washington,
Yes.
Evelyn Bullock,
Yes.
Chris Disick,
Yes.
Franklin Lamb,
Yes.
Sharonda Thomas Bullock,
I don't know, she muted.
Ricky Jenkins,
Yeah.
Donovan,
Yes.
Reginald Silver.
Yes.
Dean Edwards.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Board Clerk. The one item, next item on the agenda will please be the mask mandates. There's an action required on that. I'm gonna turn it over to our superintendent.
Board, I appreciate your meeting on short notice. We had a lot of changes over the, probably last week. What we're gonna do is go over the changes. Ms. Grant's modified some. We've got a PowerPoint. We've taken some slides out because they're redundant, but we're gonna go over the biggest ones to the changes, and it'll require a vote tonight. Ms. Grant.
All right. Good evening. We are excited to come back before you tonight and give you some important updates. Tremaine, you can go ahead to the next slide, that have occurred since the last time we met. And a lot of these changes came out last week, actually. So we did have an update to the toolkit on February 11th, and a lot of the guidance on in-home exposures and quarantine times changed as of today. As many of you probably saw, the governor and DHHS had joint recommendations that they issued in changes to strong schools to take effect March 7th, and we're going to talk about those. The CDC also had a press conference with the White House COVID Task Force, where they will be updating their mask guidance within the next couple of weeks. And then there's also Senate Bill 173 that was ratified in the Legislative General Assembly and sent to the governor, which is the Free the Smiles Act, which does give parental discretion in face coverings. The governor, it can sit with the governor, it has not been signed by him yet. Okay, and just to review some of the toolkit changes that have occurred and some of the proposed changes from DHHS and the governor's information as well. So the biggest toolkit changes that we have had thus to date since the toolkit has come out is that we are no longer required to do individual contact tracing, and they're in the exclusion from school for asymptomatic people after an exposure is no longer recommended. So it used to be that as long as we were a mask required district, we would implement test to stay. If there was an exposure, kids could stay. Now, regardless of whether that exposure is, if it's in school, a sports, household, non-household, it doesn't matter. We are no longer required to exclude children regardless of mask usage and vaccination status. The only thing we are required to do is notification to the school community, and we plan to keep our COVID information on our website, and we've asked the schools to do a link or have some link there, which when we update the weekly cases that we have on there as well. We'll still be allowed to test, and we'll still have that option, but we were able to hold on to a lot of kids instead of quarantine them and keep them in school because of being mask mandated, and now they've removed that from the toolkit. Okay. The update to the mask guidance was where the governor and DHHS did announce that districts consider moving to voluntary masking at the discretion of local authorities. Masks are still recommended in indoor settings for people at high risk for severe disease and those who are not up to date on their vaccines. And that because masks can add that layer of protection, we are still going to have those students and staff who choose to wear a mask, and they certainly will be able to do that. And that option will definitely not be taken away. So masks are still required in some cases. The case where they will be required is following a COVID positive case, then there is 5 days at home and 5 days of returning to school, and that is a mask required time. Until the CDC updates their mask guidance, then we are still required to wear masks on school or activity buses. That's a federal guideline that we can't change until they update their changes, and it is recommended following exposure, but not required. So because Senate Bill 654 is still in place, then the board does have to vote monthly. And in the February 6th board meeting, the board did vote. You voted to continue the face mask requirements. The superintendent is recommending tonight that we move to the following face mask requirement, that face coverings become optional for all children, staff, and visitors in all of our facilities. And until the CDC updates their mask requirements, that all passengers and staff must continue to wear their mask on the buses and any other group transportation. That's it. Questions?
Ms. Bullock?
I didn't see an effective date for the recommendation. What is that?
The recommendation, the governor did announce that it can be made at any time. They are putting it into the toolkit effective as of March 7th, but it still allows local boards and local authorities to make the decision for it to occur at any time.
And what is the recommendation of the superintendent?
We would like
in
it
the
as
report
soon as tomorrow. We want to start it.
tomorrow,
Tomorrow,
immediately.
Immediately.
Well, let me just, if you guys could take holiday, please. Thank you. Ms. Bullock, let me just say, immediately, meaning, as we came in this morning or this afternoon, it's something that's still out in the meetings. It's still a mandate in this facility until 7 a.m. South Carolina tomorrow morning.
Correct.
Okay. So we want to make sure we're in compliance with what the order is.
And we should be.
So any other questions or discussions for? Okay, so based on the recommendations of the superintendent, we make mask wearing an option. And I will say this before we get started. Basically, I just like to say this board has always tried to be in compliance with the legislature and what the General Assembly and the DHS has always been saying. Our decisions pretty much, I know mine has been all with the superintendent's lead. We place him in that role with his staff who are doing an outstanding job to make the best decision that's going to keep our kids in school. Not, you can't teach kids when they're outside of school. So I applaud you and your staff for an outstanding effort with that. With that said, Madam Board Clerk, I'd like to do a roll call, please, or vote by, I'm going to start with.
You need a motion.
I need a motion. I'm sorry. Thank you, Ms. Bullock.
I'll gladly make that motion.
Second.
It's been moved by Chris and seconded by
Jenkins.
Mr. Jenkins. Questions or discussions?
Got one question.
Yes, sir, Mr. Lamb.
As soon as the CDC in Washington makes a decision, I think we ought to follow the same thing we're voting on tonight for our buses and activity buses. It starts immediately as soon as they make their decision. We won't have to meet again
Right.
That's a good
to
point.
do that. We need to follow the same protocol on the buses and activity buses as soon as we have the guidelines are released.
So that's a great point,
Mhm.
Mr. Lamb. If Mr.
We can do that. That's fine.
Any objection from the board?
So are you saying that
Amend
the
his,
CDC says no mask required?
That's the federal.
Right, but if the CDC says that masks are still required on buses, we'll do that.
We still have to follow the federal guidelines.
Right.
I'm just saying that we don't need to wait. If they come out tomorrow
Mhm.
and reduce it, that we don't need another special call meeting. We just follow the same protocol we're doing tonight.
Is that
Mr.
even?
I just wanted to
Mr.
make sure
Chairman.
That even be
that everybody
Oh,
understood.
wait. One at a time. Ms. Bolton, that answer suffices for you?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood what was put on the floor.
The board recognizes Ms. Davis.
Can Mr. Bissett
Well,
include
my
that in
question
his,
is- My question will be, is we even need to vote on that? If it's a federal guideline, that's not
well,
up
she's,
to us.
they're
right?
saying to include it with the motion that we're voting on now. That's the point. So I was asking if you could make
Now, his
that,
question was to drop it. I was just saying, why do we even need to do that? That's a federal guideline outside of our control. correct?
Well, he
Well,
was
I was
saying he
saying
did not
too-
want another meeting, and I was saying if you could amend your motion to include it, then we got that knocked out of the way at the same time.
I don't think it's a
Yes.
requirement, but I'll make, if that's what it
Okay.
takes. So
Then we cover, we don't have to have a new meeting.
We'll double.
So it's been amended, Mr. Bishop.
I'll amend that to include the CDC, follow the CDC guidelines for federal regulation.
And Mr. Jenkins, you continue to second the motion. So it's been moved and properly second. So I need a vote.
Can we clarify, if you don't mind? I mean, the motion was to follow the CDC guidelines. I just think if we're going to try to proactively provide a motion, if we can make it as clear as we can exactly what the vote is, that would be great.
Rod, the question would be is, do we even need to include the federal regulations in our local mask indoor mandate?
I think your current mandate, so to speak, includes wearing masks on buses. So I think that to the extent that what your motion is that if, it probably ought to just be two motions, to be honest, but if we're going to try to make it one motion, I think it would need to basically say something like, to the extent that the CDC relaxes its guidance or changes its guidance on masking on buses, the school system will follow it. I mean, the downside of that is we don't know what they're going to do.
But either way, we're gonna follow it.
But I think that, certainly to say that you're just going to follow whatever guidance they have as it relates to masking on buses, I think would be acceptable.
Okay, thank you, Rod. Thank you. So I need a vote, please. Any other questions before we move on with the vote? Madam Clerk?
Mike Dunton,
Mrs. Clerk, Madam Clerk, I vote in support of the superintendent's recommendation to make masks optional for students, staff, and visitors in all school facilities with, I guess, us following CDC requirements on buses going forward.
Yes.
yes. Evelyn Bullock,
Yes.
Chris Bishop,
Yes.
Franklin Roman,
Yes.
Sharonda Thomas Bullock,
Yes.
Ricky Jenkins,
Yes.
Rhonda Davis,
Yes.
Reginald Silver,
Yes.
Dean Edwards.
An overwhelming yes.
So I will say this again, and we'll close it out. The decision was not made based on input, what folks were saying from the audience. The decision was made based upon what the data was driven. We've said all along, the toolkit will be a major factor with the decision that we were making. The toolkit and the data and DHHS. So I want to thank the board for unanimously voting that vote and carrying out that decision. I also want to make a couple other things before we adjourn this meeting. We will be getting evaluations coming up pretty soon. I'll be releasing that with Dr. Washington regarding the superintendent evaluation, as well as meetings, upcoming meeting with Edgerton County Commissioners and the Nash County Commission. That will be coming forthcoming. So if there's no other thing that will grab this board's attention, I need a motion. So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Silver, seconded by Ms. Davis. Any questions or discussions? Roll call vote, Madam Board Clerk.
Mike Dunton,
Yes.
Bill Sharp,
Yes.
Dr. Washington, yes. Evelyn Bullock,
Yes.
Chris Bishop,
Yes.
Franklin Lamb.
Yes.
Sharonda Thomas Bullock.
Yes.
Ricky Jenkins.
Yes.
Donna Davis.
Yes.
Reginald Silver.
Yes.
Dean Edwards.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that call, Ms.
So we're adjourned.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.